You haven't even heard what I have to say yet. Okay, so since we're a nice cozy audience, I mean, the material I've prepared is introductory, mostly anyway. So the idea is to give a flavour of what Darcs is about, why it exists, how it works at a fairly high level. But I do know that at least a third of the audience is quite familiar with Darcs, and I don't know about the rest of the audience, but I'm quite happy to sort of, dive into more details in terms of questions and so forth if people would like that. When I get to the demo, for example, if everybody feels that they know exactly what Darcs does and so forth, I can skip that, and instead you can ask difficult questions about some of the other slides. So I guess, does anybody not know what Darcs is? Has anybody here not used Darcs? Okay, so then at least some introductory material is worthwhile. Oops, sorry. Right. Okay, so what is, so I guess from a point of view of a Haskell programmer, you probably only come across Darcs, these days you probably only come across Darcs occasionally. A lot of, 5 years ago, most Haskell projects were hosted in Darcs, and now, roughly speaking, Git is one, and there are only a few diehard projects that are still using Darcs. So what is it exactly? Well, like Git and Mercurial and so forth, it's a distributed version control system, and historically it was one of the very early ones to be around after TLA and what's now Arch and some ancient stuff in that mold. So in other words, it's distributed. It's not like Subversion and CVS. It doesn't have one central server, or at least you're not forced to have one central server. But I think the concept of distributed version control is now pretty familiar to people. Unlike other distributed systems, or in fact any other version control system, the first class objects in Darcs are patches. So in most version control systems, what you try to do, what the version control system cares about is storing trees of your source tree. And you change it a bit and it stores another copy of your source tree, probably with a lot of sharing and optimizations, so that it's not storing an entire copy each time. But as far as the version control system is concerned, its job really is just to give you back a source tree at a particular revision and keep track of all that for you. Darcs tries to, in its sort of fundamental model, use patches, so the changes between trees rather than the actual trees themselves. And I'll go into more about that later. So why bother? And by the way, I would just add that it is, I'm very happy to have heckling from Git users who think that Git is the be-all and end-all. We can have a nice argument. But why bother keeping Darcs going? We could basically tell everybody who's using Darcs, you might as well switch to GitHub right now. So those of us who are still working on it think that it does actually, this idea of using first-class patches is actually important. It does actually give you a kind of power and a different kind of model for working with version control that makes that really does give you something that Git and Mercurial and so forth don't give you. And the other aspect of this is that, in practice, most projects are hosted in Git nowadays, and we're working on having a bridge to Git so that people will be able to host their projects in Git, and some people will be able to use Darcs, or some people might have their central host be in Darcs and allow people to submit Git patches. So that's kind of in progress, but.
You mentioned Git. Git gives the impression of being based on classes too, or gives the impression that classes are the first classes.
In what way does it?
When I look at my Git code,
well, no. What you see in the Git user interfaces are commits, right? So there are, and so those are that's a specific state of a repository, right? So if you bring up the Git user interface and you will see a tree of or graph really of revisions, and each of those revisions will correspond to a specific source tree. Whereas in Darcs, when you look at the changes in a repository, each of those changes really does correspond to the changes from the previous state, and that's how Darcs stores them, and that's how Darcs lets you manipulate them. That would be my. I'm sure you know what I mean really here, but that would be my spiel for that question. Okay, so what does it really mean to have first-class patches? Well, I guess part of this is really just a philosophical difference. Haskell has first-class functions, so does C#. right? But it's fairly clear which you'd prefer to use if you really want to write functional programs. And that's the same kind of thing with Darcs. You know, you could, if you look at Git or Mercurial or whatever through the right glasses, you could think of the diff to the previous revision as being the first class objects in that system, but really it doesn't make it easy to work with it in that way. Darcs does its very best to make it easy as possible to treat patches as the real unit of work in a Darcs repository. So what does it actually mean in practice? So one of the really key benefits that you get from using Darcs is that cherry picking changes is very easy, it's encouraged by the user interface, it's very cheap, and once you've done it, once you've cherry picked a change and you decide you want the changes that you skipped over when you did the cherry picking, you pull those back into your repository and you've got exactly the same thing as you would have had if you pulled them in the normal order. Okay, so Darcs kind of gives you, and I'll show you that a bit more in my demo. And whereas if you did that in Git, you'd end up with two different repositories. You'd have to merge the two to get back to the same state. The other thing about Darcs is that merges are deterministic. So anytime you do a merge in Darcs, it will give you exactly the same result wherever you are in the world, whatever version of Darcs you're using. The behavior of the merge will just depend on what Darcs chose to record at the time you actually saved your patches. From the point of view of a user of Darcs, we like to think that we have a simple, intuitive user model. If you just sort of start using Darcs without knowing how to do so, we hope that you will quickly get to grips with what's going on behind the scenes enough to understand how to use it, but not really need to understand the guts too much. And I think that's a criticism that a lot of people make of Git, that it's very hard to use it well without having expert level knowledge of a large portion of how Git works and how you're expected to interact with it. So by contrast, again, Darcs tries to have a simple command set. Another philosophical point about Darcs is that we try to make commands interactive by default. So when you've got some options about what you could do with a command, rather than having to pass some flags to figure out exactly to get that behavior, Darcs will try to ask you questions. I mean, that's not entirely the case, but it will ask you questions about what would you how much of this would you like to make, for example, that kind of thing. So, what doesn't Darcs have? Well, a whole load, really. So, the features that people tend to find missing more and more are multiple head repositories. So, in Darcs, you have to have one directory per checkout, basically, per branch. So, if you want to branch and have two different things in flight and switch between them, you need to just use two different directories in your file system. Hopefully, we'll fix that at some point, but it's not trivial. And some people argue that we shouldn't do it, but I think most of Darcs developers concluded that we should. Darcs makes a mess of conflict handling if you have complicated conflict. So simple conflicts aren't particularly problematic, but when you start having conflicts and that kind of thing, both the user interface and the internals of Darcs tend to get a little bit upset. In practice, people don't run into this very often. I mean, Darcs works fine with small to medium-sized repositories. It doesn't really work brilliantly with really huge repositories. And another part of that is another point on here that it's not all that fast. It doesn't have unique revision identifiers for a particular state of the repository, which really annoys some people, because in things like Git or even Subversion, you just say, here, this number represents an exact state of the repository. You give that to somebody else, and if they've got enough state, they'll be able to reproduce that exactly what you had. And really, these days, what Darcs is missing is not GitHub. And of course, it doesn't have the whole set of tooling or in fact, a large user community around it. Well, it never did have a large user community, but it's shrunk a bit. And yeah, it's not all that fast. But still. What about code complexity? For what? If there are no conflicts involved, then there's a merge. Okay, so a merge in Darcs is asymptotically more complex than a merge in Git if you've got a very large history leading up to the merge. So if you've branched and you've made 100 changes on each side, and you've got, say, a one file repository, then in Darcs a merge will scale with the number of changes that you've made on each, like the product of the number of changes on each side. Whereas in Git it would scale with the number of, with the size of the tree roughly. So that's kind of, I mean, it's, Darcs might be faster or probably wouldn't be, but it could in principle be with, just a single change. Well, maybe not.
I have in mind it for that complexity problem.
Is the what? Do you mean with respect to conflicts or with respect to just merging in general? Right. So yes. I mean, so it is quadratic. Yes, it's the product. If you've got two branches, 100 changes on each side of the branch that are unique to that side, to that branch, to each separate branch, then it will be 100 times 100 will be the amount of work Darcs has to do to merge those changes. I mean, I don't think that's such a big problem in practice. Sorry? Yeah, I mean, so if you get conflicts, then that is a real problem. But if you don't get, if it's a clean merge, yeah, I mean, that is a significant point that it does do these merges one step at a time. But I personally don't think you run into it that often with sort of, well, at least medium-sized repositories. Okay, so I'll dive into a demo now. So there are some people who haven't seen Darcs, so I guess I'll go into it properly. Okay, so I'm going to start by making a Darcs directory to hold my repository. Can everyone read this okay? I think I checked from the back earlier, so I think it should be all right. Okay, so I'm going to keep my repository in this directory, and the first thing I do is do a Darcs init. Just get the basic metadata in place, make this be an empty repository, and then I'm going to copy in a simple source file that I prepared earlier for the purpose. Sorry. So just to show you what's in that file for now, it's just sort of a very basic Haskell program that I shall make a few changes to. Okay, and so the next thing I need to do is tell Darcs that this file exists in my repository and is something that it should track. So Darcs add. And so in Darcs, there is the command, the equivalent of what might be called commit in many other version control systems is called record. Which means record a patch. So I'm going to run that command. And it's scrolled confusingly because I've zoomed in too much. Now I can't find my mouse pointer, sorry. Okay, is it going to be okay if I make the font a bit smaller so I can actually see the full width? Right, is that still readable for everybody? Okay. All right, so Darcs is just going to, now is this, what I was saying about it being interactive before, it's just going to ask me about what I've done, and what I've done is I've added the file and I've put some contents in the file. So I'm just going to record this initial patch. So this is just the initial version. Okay, so then Darcs asks me some stuff about, just confirms for sure that I want to record exactly what I said I wanted to record, and asks me what the name of the commit, or name of the patch is going to be. And if I wanted to, it would fire up an editor and let me edit, put a longer comment than a single line. Yep.
Question, the first change was adding the file.
Yep.
The second was adding the contents.
That's right, yes.
So you only need to do the add once.
That's right. Yes. I mean, it's exactly the same as tracking a file in any other system. You just so that otherwise, there is also. I could have also done this by saying Darcs record -l, which says look for adds, and it would have then gone off and looked for every file in the repository and let me add that. So it's a trade-off between whether you want to have untracked files to worry about or not. Okay. So I'm not going to add a long comment. Okay. So now I'm going to edit that file. Okay, so I'm going to make a couple of changes to this file. So firstly, I'm going to just add one more thing that this program is going to do. And secondly, I'm going to change one of these messages that it's already printing out. Okay. And then I'm going to come back and record that changes. So Darcs accepts prefixes of any command that it normally that are unique. So I can use rec as a synonym for record, which I at least personally find quite useful. Blast. Okay, sorry, my demo's just gone a bit wrong. So what I was hoping at that point was that Darcs, actually, no, this is fine, I can still do this. So what I was intending for at this point when I did was that Darcs would give me those two changes as separate changes to the repository. But what it's done is it's decided that the diff, that this all lives in one part of the diff. So it's showing me two changes I made at once. And since I actually want to show you how it will treat those two as separate changes, that's a bit inconvenient. Sorry, there is still going to be a second change, yes, but it's not going to make semantic sense when I start making other changes to the patch. So what I'm going to do actually is bring up something I wasn't intending to show you, which is the interactive editor for changes that you make for patches that you're recording. So what I actually wanted Darcs to do was say, okay, well, I want the addition of the exclamation mark to be one change, and I want this say goodbye to be a different change. So what I'm going to do here is just edit this kind of intermediate state that Darcs has presented me with to say, okay, well, the first change I want you to show me is that addition of the exclamation mark, and then the second change you can show me will be the addition of goodbye. Okay, so and what I actually wanted to do was, so I've used K to go back because what I actually wanted to do was record the addition of the text first and then the addition of the message for reasons I'll explain in a minute to change this message. So I shall say no to this one, and oh blast. All right, fine. Let's. Okay, I'm going to start again with this so this actually works out properly. So now I'm jumping around in what I was actually intending to do. Usually this kind of thing doesn't, I mean, this kind of problem where Darcs wants to show you changes that it didn't, that are stuck together in ways you didn't quite expect, is less likely when you're working with bigger repositories because the changes that you make are more likely to be widely spread across the, either inside a single file or between different files. What's happened here is I've tried to make a very small demo, and as a result, everything's, the diffs that it's asked me about are not quite the ones I wanted.
You could be in before.
So what I'm actually going to do is just go back and put some lines in so that it doesn't. It definitely gives me the diff I want, just to cheat a bit, really, just to make this demo work at least reasonably quickly. Okay, so I'm using a command called Darcs Revert now, which that's what Rev is short for, which just offers me the changes that I've made locally in my repository and says, do you want to throw these changes away? And again, it's offering them to me one at a time, so I can just. But in this case, I want to get rid of all of them. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, sorry, it's supposed to be Haskell. Sorry, can't use Y either. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to make those same changes again, and hopefully this time it will offer me those changes independently. If I can work by, which I apparently can't. Excuse me. Oh yeah, thanks. I wasn't actually going to run the program, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I like people to think that I write valid Haskell. Okay, so that's one of the changes I could that I could record, which is the addition of the exclamation mark, and the addition of the goodbye message is the other change that I can record. And what I'm going to do, and I mean clearly I could record any of these. I could record any subset of these three things that I chose to. Yes, sorry.
My question is that if you have two change sets,
Yeah.
the only difference is that now the line in between the changes has some content. In the previous case, it was an empty line, but before there is not understand why is it a different case?
Okay, so the only reason it's different is because it's a heuristic in diff.
Sorry?
It's a heuristic in diff. So at the point, so I mean, I guess this is jumping ahead a little bit in some sense, but if you, when you do a three-way merge in any version control system, what will happen is that the version control system will run diff between the base of your merge and the two options, and then it will try to merge those changes. And at the point where it runs the diff, there are usually multiple choices for what kind of diff you can get. Right, and so what's happened here is that because there are two blank lines in the file, the choice about whether to line up the blank lines with each in the old file and the new file. In the old file, there was one blank line in between the say hello and the and main, and in the new one there was a blank line between say hello and goodbye and say goodbye, and there's another blank line between say goodbye and main. So how diff has chosen to line up the blank line between the old version and the new version of the file is what has affected what's been presented to me. And so what I did was I changed one of those blank lines to be something a bit more than just a blank line, thus forcing it, which meant that it couldn't possibly line those two up.
That's my point. That for me, that having a blank line and having the line with content doesn't really seem to be the difference.
The difference is that line with content, when I added the first, I didn't copy that content. I put a blank line in. So the blank line is different from the content that was there before. So if you look at it's really just blank lines diff getting a little bit confused about. It's always a heuristic that diff applies. Yes, exactly. So it's just all that Darcs is doing at this point is making a diff and presenting me with the individual pieces of that diff.
Doesn't it make the number of change sets too large if you're just editing and filing not subsequent lines, but just having one line press in between them? It would just say, actually, you edited this part of the line, but this is 9 changes for me.
So Darcs will offer you all 9 changes individually if you've made changes that are separated in the file, and you do have this interactive prompt actually has a bunch of commands bunch of keys that you can use at this point to choose. You don't have to say yes or no to every single change. So the standard thing you'd use in that case is if you know you want everything that you've done into that file, then you just press F to say record all changes to that file. Or record all further changes to this file. So you can, for example, if you've made some change that you didn't want to record, you'd say no at the beginning, and then you can say or A, for example, to record everything that it's going to offer. Okay, so right now I'm going to record the addition of say goodbye and the call to say goodbye together, so that those live together with an atomic change set and an atomic patch.
Once you've recorded those two together, are they kind of like stuck together forever?
Yes. Yeah, pretty much. Yep.
If you accidentally 2 of 3,
Yep.
what happens to the original file? Is that
The file in the file in your direct when you're doing a record, the file in your directory doesn't get touched at all. All you're doing is changing the sort of the current version controlled state. So there's always an implicit diff between what you've done in your working directory and what the state of the very last revision in the repository was. And so that diff has now got smaller, but the actual file hasn't changed. So on the other hand, if I'd used Revert, which is about changing the state of your working copy, then I could have reverted some of these changes and not others, and then the file would have been put back into some sort of state a little bit closer to the recorded copy. But okay, so I've recorded a change That's called add say goodbye, which has that change in it. And now I'm going to record another patch that incorporates the last change that I had and nothing else. Okay, so now what I've recorded is, apart from the initial setup of the repository, I've recorded the change to. I've recorded two different changes. Firstly, I've added say goodbye, and secondly, I've changed the text of hello. Okay, now I just remembered that I forgot to clone this repository at the time I intended to. So I'm going to do it now anyway. So I'm going to clone. I'm going to clone the repository that I made into another one. And that's Darcs get is the standard command for doing that, and you can use that with remote repositories as well. And because I forgot to do this at the time I intended to, which was before I recorded that change, I'm going to delete a couple of changes from this repository using the obliterate command. Okay, so, and now I'll get back to what I actually intended to do at this point, which is to show the pull command, which is about moving patches between repositories. And this is the point where I'm going to show you how cherry picking works in Darcs in a sort of simple, intuitive way. So if I try to pull from repository 1, it's going to offer me the changes that I made to that repository in the order that they exist in that repository. So this is a set of changes that are in the other repository, not in my present one, and it's going to show me them in the order that they live in that one.
You've got a comment there. That's the one line comment.
Yeah.
Can you see the code?
Yes. So X will give me a summary of it, and V will show me the code. Though there's a little bit of metadata that probably would be more user-friendly to have elided, but
It gives you 2 lines of code.
yeah. Okay, so at this point, I don't want to say goodbye yet. I just want that hello change, but that was the second change I made. So I'm going to say no to this, and it's still going to offer me the hello message pull. So I'm going to pull that, and there we are. And if I have a look at the contents of demo.hs now, it's got that change to hello, but it hasn't got the change to goodbye, even though that was never one of the recorded states that I made in the previous repository.
Is the fetch available somewhere globally? So if
Yes.
the critical one is still remote, I disconnect. This change just said no, don't pull it.
Okay, no, it's not. It's not available locally. So if you wanted that, then what you would need to do is clone the entire repository and then into a different directory and then start pulling from that. Yes. And in fact, that's the way I typically use Darcs. When I work on the train a lot, I will just do a pull from the upstream repository to somewhere and then work from that locally. Okay, so yeah, so I've got this change that was one of the 2 changes I made, but not in the order that I made it. Now I'm going to go back to the other repository, and I'm going to use a command called Darcs replace. So Darcs replace is a search and replace operation on your repository. It takes, if I show you demo.hs, I've decided I want to rename the print message function to something different. So I'm going to do Darcs replace print message, output message, demo.hs. Okay, now, so firstly I'd emphasize that this is a pretty dumb search and replace, right? It doesn't take any account of language semantics or anything like that. So if I had a variable called print message somewhere else in scope, then it would happily rename that as well. Okay, so now I've done this replace. It's changed my file for me, but it hasn't actually recorded a patch to say this is a change I made. So I'll just do that. And the change is actually expressed as this replacement operation. And yes, I want to record that. Okay, so just looking at demo.hs again, there've been a couple of occurrences of output message of what were print message that are now output message that have been changed by this replace operation. Now, if I go back to repository 2, that doesn't actually have all those call sites for print message because I didn't pull the change where I said called say goodbye as well. But if I pull from repository 1, I can still ignore the say goodbye change and I can pull the print message change. And what's it done to my file? Sorry. Okay, well, it's it hasn't pulled the say goodbye, so there's no change there, but it has renamed print message to output message correctly. And finally, if I pull again from repository 1, and I bring back the say goodbye change, I could also have shown you that patch that did it. It's pulled back say goodbye, this say goodbye change, which was originally recorded as an addition of print message. But now in the context that it's just been pulled, it's an addition of output message, because that's what makes your program make sense. Now, that's only true because the replace was a safe thing to do on my repository. But nonetheless, it's done the right thing. And so the other point about this is that now this repository is pretty much identical to that first one. There's no other changes I can pull from the other one. If I sort of ask Darcs, you know, are there any differences between these two repositories? There won't really be any. Sure. Okay, so Darcs changes is just a list of what patches you have in your repository in reverse order. And as you can see in this repository, it's this way round, and in the other repository, it's you've got them in the order that I originally recorded them. Yeah.
So if I actually enter into your third repository, something which has the print message inside.
Yeah.
And I want the print message to be there, and then put that change into repository 2.
You want to keep the print message, you mean?
Yes.
So
What is this side? When do you apply the rename and whatnot?
okay, so if I was to now start editing after this rename operation and put a new print message in there, right? Then that will be safe because it comes after the replace. But if you work in a repository that hasn't seen the replace already,
But you have put the say goodbye after the
yeah, but I mean, so either repository, it doesn't really make any difference now. But if I can safely change demo.hs now and put in.
No. What I mean is that you pulled the change set, which had the print message inside.
Well, it was originally recorded with the print message change, yes.
So you put the change set which had actually the content saying print message.
Yeah.
Get the result. And you put it on top of your already replaced content.
Yeah.
Still it's saying that it's output message. What is it?
Well, I think that was what was expected to happen, because if you look at it from the other repository's point of view, the replace was operating on both print messages. So. Mm-hmm.
So in the log of the first one, the docs changes of the first one, you have replace the names, add a change, which is explicitly have print message inside.
That's the point of what Darcs has done here, is that it's decided to it's changed the behaviour of that, it's changed the contents of that patch because of the order in which it's put them. In which repository? In repo 2. Okay, so the patch itself has been changed by the fact that we've reordered it to say this patch is an addition of output message. It doesn't have exactly the same text in it, and that's exactly the point of having first-class patches, that that Darcs will change the patch. So the point is that the Darcs has tried to preserve the meaning of the patch, right? So the meaning of the repository that we had. So I mean that's the point of using replace. Right, you're kind of asking Darcs to do that. You're saying that. So looking at it from another point of view, right? So let's say that I've been developing a program with print message in it, and then I decided I'm going to rename print message to output message. Okay, and in parallel to that, somebody else decides that they're going to add a call to print message.
I fully understand the rationale behind it.
Okay.
I just don't know whether I like this definition of discipline.
Oh, yeah, fair enough. Well, okay. Yeah, so I think otherwise, if pulling the say goodbye had resulted in print message at the end of repo 2, that would have been incorrect, right? It wouldn't have actually been a functioning program. So if you want this property about cherry picking and so forth, where you can get patches out of order and then pull the other ones back, it has to do that. I guess that's another way of justifying what it did if you don't like it, but anyway. Yes, I think yeah.
Sort of output message and then kind of like, and then took out the rename to kind of take that and kind of put it back to print message. I never really wanted to cut that.
So if I now added an call to output message in my repository afterwards, and then I unpulled the removed the replace patch, it would change that to print message, and that would be correct. But the name capture point that I thought maybe you were asking was that if I had, say, a local variable called print message or output message, depending on in which state I added it, then the replace patch is going to do the wrong thing with that. So, if somebody else in another branch has decided to write a function that internally uses a print message variable of its own.
Yes, I suppose if I put print message in, then I will remove the replace.
It won't. If you do that, it won't let you do it. So part of the Darcs user interface is that it will detect things that don't make sense, like from a. Yes, and.
The replace is global. I can't kind of have a version replace that says that I'll replace it with these two replaces.
It's file by file. There is no patch type for moving code between between places in files. It's something that we would like to add, but yeah, we haven't done it yet. Okay. Okay, so I've already shown you Revert. Actually, no, I'll show you a bit more of that. So if I just edit demo.hs a little bit more, just add some garbage in two places. No, I can't. Sorry, failing to use vi. Okay, so I just added a couple of lines, and now I want to get rid of those lines. And again, as I showed you before, Darcs offered those independently, so I can say revert just the wibble bit, and then I'll be left with wobble in the file, and then I can revert that as well, and that's gone. Darcs also has an inverse of revert. So Darcs tries to make most operations undoable. There are cases where that's not really feasible, but for example, Darcs has this unrevert command that will let you undo the last revert that you did, but not the one before that, so I can't get wibble back anymore. Okay, I'm going to change the file this time and keep the changes. So I'm going to change this text to oops. And now I'm going to record another change with that in it. Oops, I forgot to get rid of that. Never mind, I'll do that in a minute. Sorry, my laptop's frozen up. I think it's frozen solid. That's what you get for running Windows. I'm going to have to reboot it. Sorry. I think it may have hardware problems of some kind. It's occasionally. Well, I mean, all I can say is that my laptop does lock up a lot, and I do run Darcs on it a lot. But I think it's a hardware problem. I'm not entirely certain. I'm sorry about this. So what I was about to do then was just record that patch, and then I was going to show you how you can use a command called amend record. What the fuck? I'll give it a little bit of time to...
Can we say now that that's the harder?
Can you revert this change?
Can I- Phew. Yeah, so what I was going to show you at that point was editing a patch that you've already recorded to add some extra changes to it, and I'll just do that next, just to.
So is there any kind of long-term plans to extend these patch types to things that no rise syntax?
Yes, but that's particularly difficult.
Yeah.
So the problem with extending it to know about syntax trees is that you have to fix your parser. You have to decide that this one parser that exists right now is the one that's actually we're going to use to parse the code. So if the language changes a bit, you end up having to version things. So that's probably a reasonable way down the line. Actually. Yes, sorry, but you have to keep you still have to keep the old one around so that you can read old patches. So yes, you can record new patches with a new parser, but then you have to figure out how you merge between the patches that were recorded with the different parsers, and you have to.
Well, so you could do things like rename something function and if I use it in strings somewhere, it's going to get the string. And other things like use the variable. They get kind of more semantic change with the how you've got. Yes, sure.
But can I mention one points of distribution of vegetables?
Would you like to finish your parser? If you kind of imagine, if you're creating your patches by recording,
Mm-hmm.
and then you've got, at some point, you're consuming those patches elsewhere. Somebody else is putting the patches.
Yeah.
Do you need to have the parser in both?
Oh no, you don't.
Only the recording stage?
No, yes, you're right. You only need to have the parser at recording stage, but you do need to the kind of meaning of that tree. So the pretty printer you do need to have everywhere. You need to be able to invert that. You need to be able to invert what you recorded to actually show the user what the real source would be.
But if I really wanted the kind of the non-word I can kind of write a function where I make sure every time I use that function and literally just do a textual place. So if I used it 4 times, it might give me 3 lines of code that I actually change and just treat that as a patch.
Yeah, so absolutely. And then you won't get that nice behaviour I showed you where.
It would break if I started first of all.
Yeah, so it will fail. It will refuse to let you cherry pick around that then. Okay, let me record this change as I was trying to do. Not that one.
I can't have my cake and eat it.
Exactly. Okay, and I'm going to revert that other change that I forgot to revert before. Okay, and now I'm going to make another change to this file. Just. Okay, I won't bother calling it, that'll do. Okay, so now this time, instead of recording a separate change for this, for that edit I've just made, I want to actually incorporate it into this other patch because I think that the two belong together for some reason. I mean, in this case, they don't really, but. And so the command I can use for that is Darcs amend record, and that says that will go back and say, okay, here's the patch that you just recorded. Would you like to change that? Sorry, I was going to do that with a flag saying edit, allow me to edit the message as well. So shall I amend this patch? Yes, and then here's the change that I've just made to my repository. And shall I add this change to the patch that I've already recorded? Yes. And also give me a chance to edit the message. So I say add. Okay. So that's that's useful if you're kind of working with draft patches as you go, and then you want to just sort of keep adding changes to them, and then eventually you're done with it, and then you say, okay, I'm going to send this off to other people, and at that point you should stop amending it.
So what happens if you add two repositories, one of them edited and the other changes and pull it?
So if you make a change, pull it to the other repository, then amend the change and pull it again, it will look like a different change and it will be a conflict, yes. So you then have to go manually unpulling the other one. Okay, okay, let me just go back to my slides for a second. That work? Yes. Okay, so I've shown you a sort of a bit of the basic command set of Darcs and just sort of what the sort of model is. A new command that we're adding to Darcs in the next release that will come out in probably the next few months is a rebase command. And rebase is a concept that exists in systems like Git and so forth, and it hasn't existed in Darcs before. And in part that's because many of the things that you'd want to use rebase for in Git aren't really necessary in Darcs, because you don't have all these merge commits with Darcs that are about that where you want to because whenever you do a merge you always get the same result, so Darcs doesn't have to present you with a merge commit, and you don't need to use rebase to do cherry picking, which is another thing that is used for in Git. But nonetheless, there are cases where you do want to do a rebase. You want to change a whole sequence of patches in your history so that they're maybe more up to date or so forth. So we're adding a rebase command. And so the way that the rebase command works is it kind of puts your repository into a temporary state where you're doing some work on some patches and some other patches have been sort of suspended, and then you can bring those patches back into your repository with an unsuspend command. So I'll just show you that now, except for that. What happened? Okay, so I'm just going to throw away that change I just recorded and do the same thing again, but with a slight twist to it. Which I can use. Never mind about the typo. And I'm going to make a second change on top of that, which is that I want to I also want to write this to standard. I want this to go to standard error as well. So here's my second change, which is use standard error. Okay, so now I want to do that amend that I did before. I want to add that extra. I'm going to put that call to say we back in. And I'd like to change that patch that I wrote before, the one where I changed the message. I want to insert this say we into that patch again. So I don't want to edit the standard error patch, so I say no to that. But then Darcs isn't going to let me do that amend record on the update message patch, which is what I actually want to change, because I've made a patch on top of that depends on that patch. There's no way that those two patches can be logically untangled from each other, because Darcs is a line by line has made a line by line diff, and the diff for the standard error lives directly on top of the diff where I changed say to wants to say. So I'm out of luck if I want to amend it, and that's where Rebase comes in. So Rebase will say, okay, well, this standard error patch is in the way now. Let's push it out of the way for a bit. Okay, so that's disappeared from our repository, and it's now suspended. So if I just look at the changes in the repository, you can't see it anymore. But Darcs will keep reminding us of the fact that it's still around if you, and that you can get it back. Okay, so now I can amend this patch. Okay, great. So done that. Now I want my suspended patch back. Now, how's Darcs going to deal with that? Because, well, I mean, we haven't magically got round the fact that the second change I made, that's to insert standard error, really does depend on that first change I made. Sorry, will you wait? No. Okay, so, well, okay, it's going to let me unsuspend it. It's going to offer it to me. There we are. Okay, now I think there's a bug in the development version I just used, because it should have told me that it actually had a conflict. Huh? Oh, right, sorry, no, I got this demo bit wrong. That's fine. No, that bit was actually supposed to happen, and it was just not quite what I intended to do with the demo. So what happened here was that I didn't when I changed that patch, I didn't change anything about the line that was actually a problem. Right, so there should have been, if I'd tried to do anything to the output message text, then Darcs really would not have been able to figure out how to bring that patch back, unsuspend that patch into my repository. But because all I did was added say we to that change, that was fine. That it was able to do that. Now, because of some technicalities to the way the internals of Darcs works, it still has brought this patch back with a different identity, so it will actually clash with other patches in other repositories, even though it looks like exactly the same patch. But now let me just show you what would have happened if I'd done what I intended to do there. Okay, so I'll suspend that one again, and this time I'm going to edit demo.hs to also say something different here. So I can't make up my mind which editor I want to use. Okay, so I'd like to do that instead. Okay, and now I can change this update message so that it's now a patch that does this. Okay, and now if I unsuspend this patch, okay, then it tells me that things have gone a bit wrong, that it can't quite unsuspend this patch and have it be a sane patch locally. And it's also inserted some conflict markers into my repository, which is Darcs' unique style of doing conflicts, to tell me to give me the local changes that have gone wrong. Sorry, go. Yeah. It just, well, it marks up your repository like most systems would. It lets you do the operation, but says there's a conflict, and this is what the conflict is in terms of.
What I mean is, in this case, is the fact which conflict with your changes so far is still in your record state?
Yes. So the original one that was the cause of the conflict is still there, fine, and this one is in a slightly conflicted state that I'm now going to fix the conflict and. Yes. Okay, so sorry, I haven't shown you conflicts in the normal case of merging, and in that case it really is another patch on top of it. When you're using Rebase, the normal thing to do is to fix your conflict and then amend that into the patch you just unsuspended. So I won't bother doing it here because I've already spent quite a while in this demo that I didn't intend to, but what this conflict is telling us is that, well, the first line is the base of the conflict before the equals, so that was the original state, and then there were two different changes that are conflicting with each other, one of which is to insert the standard error, and the other of which is to change wants to say to would like to say. So our job is to see that and do the change for ourselves, and then edit the patch that we just unsuspended to bring all that to bring that into line. Okay, so let me go back to my talk. I did that bit of the demo. This is just a quick slide just to show you that the main sort of set of commands. Oh, sorry, wrong way around. Thank you.
That would be a good point for an argument for
Yes. In fact, so another place you wouldn't, another way we could do that would mean you wouldn't get a conflict there is if we did patches to the characters of a line, rather than a line by line thing. And that's probably more in reach as well. Okay, so just to give you a very brief overview of the sets of commands that you can do with Darcs, you know, how they all fit together. So one interesting thing is the sort of specific kinds of patch types up here. So I already showed you replace and add, and moving a file around is also a kind of operation that can use nicely with and merges nicely with other patches that, you know, also add files and so forth. Some standard remote operations, get in its mirror, pert, pull and push, obliterate, which is to remove a patch which used to be called unpull and still has that alias. There is a staging area called pending, which we do our absolute best to hide from you, unlike Git. So pending is used for things like, in fact, things like replace. Something that really can't be represented in the repository, then we put it in the staging area. So, you know, if you've made that semantic statement that you're making a change to your repository, that, you know, you can't just infer that from the files, then we put that into pending. Otherwise, it will be otherwise you just record what's in your working directory.
I guess that it doesn't make sense to have a staging area visible. So because the way how you put together the changes is actually when you're assembling your staging area, is exactly when you are just saying this is you record the changes.
Yeah.
If I understand, this is the single concept.
Yeah, I think that so the mixture of that and also the fact that amend record is designed to be fairly user friendly are the two things that make it, I think, unnecessary to have that index, have that equivalent. Okay, and yeah, there's some functions for querying a repository, you know, but for basic operation with a Darcs repository, you don't need to know all that many commands. I hope I'm getting across with that. Okay, so let's just go into a bit more technical detail about what's inside a Darcs repository. So Darcs patches are semantic descriptions of what should happen to the previous tree to give you the new tree. So an example of a Darcs patch is remove the text X that starts at line 3 in a particular file and put text Y in there instead. Another kind of Darcs patch would be add file A, or rename file B to C, or replace token X with token Y in a particular file. An important property of Darcs patches from the point of view of the internals of Darcs is that the patches are invertible. So anything that you can record in Darcs has to know how to undo it as well, so that it can kind of get back to the old tree that was before that. So for example, so it is actually important that you say remove X from the patch at line 3. You can't just say remove one line. The internals of Darcs will actually record the fact that the old version was X.
So I guess that means that of course replace won't be able to use white.
You won't be able to use what? Sorry?
So the replace policy won't be able to use white.
Wildcard. That's correct. Yes. Yeah. I mean that's not totally. I mean it can't, but that's not totally. I mean if you had a linear regular expression, it would be possible. It would be technically possible. We haven't done that, and it would probably be quite confusing. But yeah, as long as your sort of replace was invertible in some way, you could implement that. So yeah, so that, I mean, I'm not going to go into the details of why that's important, but it is one of the features of, you know, getting this reversible cherry picking operation kind of requires that you're able to manipulate patches in that kind of way, and inverting them is one of those properties. I guess another point that's worth mentioning about how Darcs patches work in general is, in most version control systems, you're kind of committed to this series of changes that you made in a particular order, whereas Darcs lets you sort of pull out random changes from the middle if there's no textual conflict. And that means that, of course, you can pull out changes that it really doesn't make sense to pull out. Because, you know, for example, if in one patch you add a function and then another patch you add a call site to that function, and then you try to cherry pick the call site of that function on its own, Darcs will probably let you do that if they weren't right next to each other, but you're not going to have a meaningful repository. But that's some power that it gives you that you have to decide how to use it. Yeah, so I've already kind of alluded to some of this stuff before. So I mean, merges in Darcs are deterministic. So every time you do a merge anywhere with two Darcs patches that were recorded at the same time, the original Darcs patches, then you'll get exactly the same result. And that means that Darcs doesn't create merge commits when you do a merge. Okay, so if you get a conflict, then you have to record a new patch to resolve the conflict, and then you've kind of got an equivalent of a merge commit. But there is no explicit sort of marker in Darcs in general for a merge happened here. Merging is associative. So say you've got 3 repositories and you decide to merge 2 of them together, and then you merge that with a third one. You will always get the same result as if you merged the second 2 as your first operation and then merged it with the third, with the first repository. So I mean that's I guess it's kind of part of the intuitive user model that we're trying to get with Darcs, that you don't really have to think about what things happen. You just, with the Darcs user interface, it tries to make that implicit that you can expect that to happen without having to think about it, and it's kind of important that it actually is true. You don't get nasty surprises that way. Okay, so going a bit more into the internals of what's of how this all works. So on the left, I've got a kind of sort of diagram that represents what happens when you have a merge operation. So we've got 2 different repositories with patch A and patch B in them. That's the difference between them. And so the base of the merge is the bottom left-hand corner. And in the 2 different repositories, we're going to end up with two different states of the repository. And the point of a merge operation in any version control system is to figure out what should that question mark be, and then do the appropriate thing with that. And in Darcs, what we would do when we do that merge is that, supposing we were pulling B into a repository that already had A, we would compute this alternative version of B prime, that is so kind of the same effect as B, but in a different context. It's now living after A, and if depending on what A and B were, we might actually have to change B into something slightly different for that to still make sense. So the Darcs internally has this concept called commuting, which is changing the order of 2 patches. And that's what I'm trying to get across with this diagram, is that really is just the inverse of the merge operation. So with a merge, you have 2 patches that start at the same place, and you want to figure out how you combine them. But there's an alternative way of looking at the sort of work involved here is that you have 2 patches that are already in the same repository in sequence, and you want to figure out how to unpick that. You want to get back to 2 patches that are totally separate from each other. So if you already know A and B prime, then what's B? Okay, and that's the fundamental part of cherry picking, because once you can do that, if you can swap the order of patches, then if we've got a repository with A and B prime and we don't want A, we just want B prime, then what we have to do is commute A and B prime to turn them into B and A prime, and then we can throw away A prime, and we've got a repository that just has to change B in it. And when we do the merge again, because of all the stuff that Darcs does behind the scenes, it's going to give you exactly the same result, B primed again. So that's why what I showed you, that's kind of a flavour of what's behind what I showed you. It's not.
There could be many B A primes there.
There could be many. So in the merge diagram, or in any of these diagrams, there has to be a unique result. Darcs, that's one of the things Darcs ensures.
So if you're given A B prime, presumably there are multiple ways of factoring B A prime.
Yes, but you have to, as Darcs will, if you're adding a new patch type to Darcs that would define what this commute would be, you'd have to do it in such a way that it would go back to B prime when you merged it again. So otherwise you'd break Darcs. So.
Just a question.
Sure.
I had more specifically the patch A. I'm pulling in another patch B. What will it store? B or B prime?
B prime.
B prime.
Yeah. So it will store them in the particular order that's useful for that working in that repository. Per repository. Yes, exactly. Okay, so yeah, this actually goes into, so I mean conceptually you can think of a Darcs repository as being a set of patches in most cases, right? So the set of patches you got in your repository, no matter what order you brought them in, the end state of your repository will be the same. But they are actually stored in a particular order that reflects how you got them. And you know, when you run things like Darcs changes, as we showed you, that does show up.
You're storing them in a particular order.
Yep.
As a user,
It's rare. I mean, I think there is a user demand for that kind of thing because you quite often want to see what the changes in your repository are that isn't in a remote repository, and it'd be useful to reorder the patches in your repository so that just your local patches are at the end of the repository. And we don't have a great command set for doing that. We do have one command that does some of that for you, but it's not. That would be overkill because it would change the identity of your patches. So you really wouldn't want to use Rebase for that. There's a command called Darcs optimize reorder, which will do that up to the last tag in the repository, but it's not sort of general. Yeah, so there's this distinction in Darcs in terms of, well, I guess in terms of both the mental model and in terms of the internals, that patches have an identity, which is the thing that they retain that as you pull them around between repositories. But as we saw, the representation of a patch can change as you pull it around. And that, due to either merging or cherry picking, depending on which way around how you're pulling it around. So, I mean, there is this kind of there's this kind of theory hiding inside Darcs, and hiding very well, because none of the people who really work in Darcs have managed to make a really formal theory behind what's happening with these patches, and that's a real shame because it ought to be possible to do. Just nobody's managed it. But we I was sort of alluding to various things that you have to get right, otherwise you'll screw up the behaviour of Darcs, and we kind of intuitively know that these things have to behave this way. And so there are some laws that we believe are true about all the Darcs patch types that we have, and that would be true about any new ones that we added. So an important one, for example, is that if you commute two patches, if you had A, B, and you swap them around, if you swap them back again, you're going to get back to the same result. So it's just the equivalence of these two commutes. And also that if you invert patches and start commuting the inverses, then you get the same result as if you left them uninverted to begin with. I'll just put that up. I don't want to explain that in detail. Another thing, I'm used quite a bit of time, so I'm just going to go over this very quickly. Is there's this? I said that merges have to be associative. And the thing that underlies that in terms of what your patches have to do is that if you start commuting patches around, so say you have your patches in the order A, B, C to begin with, and then you start changing some of those patches around, and you keep doing that, you're kind of following a path around this cube picture, and there's no absolute guarantee from any sort of external source that you will actually get back to exactly the same result when you've got to the end of that, because the commutes that you've done in each case are independent of each other. But that's another law that we expect to be true, that you will get back to the same result. And if you think of that cube as a kind of merge, that's about guaranteeing that that top right-hand corner of that cube will always be the same no matter what merges you did. Okay, so I'll finish up fairly briefly by talking a little bit about the internals of Darcs and one particular way we've used Haskell to good effect in the internals. So one of the things that's sort of, I hope, what I've already said about Darcs is that when the code of Darcs is working with patches, it's going to do a lot of time. It's going to be moving patches around between different contexts a lot. It's going to be deciding that, okay, this patch have these patches before it, and now I need to cherry pick, commute it, or merge it, and so that it's got some other patches leading up to that patch. And a lot of the time when you do that, the representation of the patch doesn't change because, for example, if you've got two patches to two different files, the order in which they're in makes no difference to their representation. But if you've got two patches to the same file, the order in which they're in, you'll have to change the line numbers in the offsets of the patch that's further down the file. So it's quite easy to get this. To firstly start using patches in the wrong context in Darcs code, in the Darcs source, and if you do that, you might not notice quickly because a lot of the things you're testing with won't actually trigger this being a problem. So here's an example of how you might actually of some code you might want to write inside Darcs. So supposing we want to commute two patches, we've got the patch C and we've got the sort of sequential composition of two other patches A and B. That's the intention of this bracketing. So I want to get to sort of C primed and then AB prime as or A prime B prime as the alternative. Okay, so if we take an imaginary patch type, which is either a null patch or nothing, or sort of two patches stuck together, and then obviously there'll be some more constructors for the real patch kinds in that. You might write a function commute that's going to have a case that's about commuting this AB as one group with C as the other group. Okay, so how you're going to do, I mean, typical Haskell, you're going to do this kind of operation by decomposing it into its sub-pieces, commute one of these two things with the other, with the next one, and then commute the results to get it all into the right order. So that's one reasonably plausible way of writing it. That happens to be totally wrong. Because what you should do is, I mean, if you just look at the order of this, it makes sense to commute B and C first, and then commute the result. You'll get ACB, and then you should commute the result A and C. Yeah, this order. But what I'm doing here is I'm commuting A and C first, and A and C aren't next to each other originally, so it really doesn't make sense to do that. But there's nothing in this code that's going to stop me from doing that, because Darcs doesn't. GHC doesn't know anything about the context of these patches. So one thing we introduced in Darcs quite some time ago now is a way of actually telling GHC, at least to some extent, this is the context of a patch. Don't let me screw up. So instead of defining just patches as being, so what I've done is I've introduced a couple of type variables here, and these type variables are phantom types, right? They don't have any reflection in reality in terms of the actual, it doesn't make sense for me to say patch int char or something like that. That's not what they're about. They're about a sort of abstract representation of the context that patch lives in. Okay, and it means that if I write some certain low-level operations carefully and don't screw up the context in the low-level operations, then the high-level operations that I build on top of those, I won't be able to, the type checker will actually stop me from getting it wrong. So the key point of this really is that this sequential composition operation now says the context must match up. So a patch AB is a patch that notionally goes from an initial starting point, initial context A, to a final context B. Okay, so the sequential composition of two patches now goes from an initial context A via an intermediate context B, to a final context C. So the sequential composition is a patch from A to C, and it's made up of two individual patches that start at A and finish at B, and start at B and finish at C. And so to actually work with this kind of stuff, you find yourself having to redefine a whole load of basic types. So what used to be just a tuple, I've now had to make a witness tuple with these extra witness types in it that says, okay, this is a pair of patches that I'm going to want to commute to be able to write the type of commute. So commute is now talking about the fact that we've got a pair of patches that goes from A to C in total, and I want another pair of patches that goes from A to C in total, but is in the opposite order internally. So I can translate that incorrect code I wrote in the previous slide into incorrect code using these phantom types, and GHC will complain. Now, the downside of using these witnesses is that the GHC complaint takes a little bit of getting used to. With some practice, you kind of get used to understanding what it's trying to tell you here, which is that, well, there was some other variable B1 that would have had to have existed for this to make sense, but it doesn't really work. And in particular, really, you can see that this expected versus actual B1 is different from B, so you know that you've got the intermediate context of this commute wrong. But it certainly makes the Darcs code harder to get into for newbies. It also stops newbies screwing up the Darcs code, so that's a sort of two-edged sword. So that's, and these contexts can't do everything. You do have to get the low-level operations right for the sort of stuff around it to make sense, and they don't, in some cases you actually have to insert assertions that say, I've thought about this, I can't convince the type checker that this is correct, but I've thought about it and it is correct, and trust me, please. Okay, so that was just a sort of brief overview of all of that stuff. So what are we going to do with Darcs next? Well, 2.10, which is the upcoming release, will have Rebase in it, and it will also have a faster annotate command. If you've used Darcs before, you'd know that the Darcs annotate command is one of the things that really is very slow. And what we've done to make that a lot better is introduced what's called a patch index, a lookup from the lines in a file to what patches touch that line in the file, so you can so Darcs can very quickly find out what patches affected a specific file. Yes, annotate is, yeah, exactly.
What would be the, so what's the circumstance in the case when you have two vectors on the same line and you just don't know what the order?
Yeah, so annotate will give you a different output depending on what order those patches are in your repository.
It depends on your order.
Yes. Yeah. So there are plenty of commands that will depend on that, and changes, just the list of changes, the annotate. The way that patches are presented to you interactively, all those things will be different depending on the order of your patches. Yep. So we're developing a bridge to Git, but it's not really ready for prime time yet. So we want to get that ready. We don't have a great hosting story. We do have a kind of a standard host for Darcs repositories that you can put online and so forth, but it's nowhere near as fully featured as GitHub. So we'd like to improve that. We'd like to have better. Most of interacting with Darcs is very text-based. In fact, all of it. I mean, the Darcs command line is just a text tool, and there are no standard graphical tools for it. What we'd like to do is make something web-based that's kind of, the same code base as the hosting code that we have. Just bring up a web browser locally and allow you to interact with your repository like that. But that's still in progress. We'd love to have multi-head repositories. Quite a bit of implementation effort. Conflict handling is a mess for a couple of different reasons, but one of which is that we don't actually have a good algorithm for figuring out deeply nested conflicts and making them behave properly, and we hope to improve that in the future. More patch types. That's kind of the point of Darcs, right? I mean, what Darcs lets you do at the moment is nice, useful, and I still personally find it a lot more usable than Git. But really, we could make Darcs really nice to use in terms of by having more patch types that let you do things like moving around chunks of text from one place to another, indent a whole set of lines by a certain amount, and have those things merge nicely with other kinds of patches where that makes sense.
About this patch type, so they have to say that any unique patch type is depending on the number of patch issues you already have. So it has to be compatible with all previous ones, making the problem.
Yes, that's well. It's not quite that bad, because there are some kinds of patches types that would never make sense to merge with each other. So, for example, if you had a semantic patch that would, about treating a source file as a parse tree and doing stuff with that, then insert a patch that inserts lines in the middle of that file is never going to merge with that sensibly. I think we just say that's a conflict. So you're kind of, and the other thing is that. Merging, files that affect the internal contents of patches that affect the internal contents of a file are independent of patches that say move around the things in the file system and so on. So yes, you're right. Basically, that quadratic explosion does happen, will happen, but there are some mitigating factors, but that's part of why it's difficult to add new patch types. Okay, so that was all I had to say really. If you want to know more about Darcs, it's got a homepage and it's got a hosting place. And we are, if any of you are students and interested in doing some stuff for Darcs, then we are participating in Summer of Code via Haskell.org. So please apply. Probably 4 or 5, that sort of.
To move to syntax trees other than the complexity of the compiler, conceptually, how hard is that?
I don't know how to merge, what the merge operations, what the sort of basic patch types for two trees would be. So let's say that we've parsed a source file and we've got a tree, and we need to define changes to that tree. And it's not completely obvious to me what those changes should be, what the actual patch types on trees would be. So I think that would, and given that it's not obvious, you're also going to need to have a good degree of certainty that it's all correct in all cases and so forth. So probably want to bring in a theorem prover or something like that to check it out.
That's quite hard.
Some work.
The demo was on a single file, which is really understandable. Are the patch types kind of affect multiple files, or if you're working with multiple files, would that affect two separate patches?
So there are patch types that affect an entire directory at a time. So you can rename a directory and all the files within that will move, and that will merge and commute nicely with, say, adding a new file to that directory on an independent branch.
But if I edited 2 files,
But if you edited two files, that's two separate patch. Well, I mean, you can stick them together into the same, patch with name. You wouldn't record them as separate. You wouldn't have to record them as separate patches. If you make a change across your source tree, the interactive record will ask you about all those changes to all the files at once, and you can select some of them to be stuck together into one patch.
So if I said yes,
yes, and then that will be an atomic change set that will,
this kind of brings me to the next question, which is understanding because this is a demo, all the patches are very small. Particularly if we kind of, people use them as an anchor. I mean, how much work would more patch an hour, 10 minutes, a day?
I think it varies quite a bit, but varying from the quick typo fix and so on, which is worth recording as a separate patch, to maybe a few hours work, or yeah.
It is a reasonable chunk of work, it's not just
Yeah, no, you would. So I mean, the Darcs repository itself has about 10,000 changes in it, and so, well, here's a very simple one that I made that was just fixing a test. This one looks quite a bit bigger. That was, I'm not sure exactly what it was about, but so you want to group together logically work that belongs together logically, because otherwise there's not much point in having atomic change sets. You want to stop people cherry picking too much as well. You want to encourage them to cherry pick things that make sense and not things that are.
I think kind of the other distribution almost encourage people to just keep mixing.
Yeah.
It's only the last version kind of disappears on to some sort of location, whereas with patches, there's a difference between having 100 patches and having 10.
Yes, I think that's right. Yeah.
How complex is it to do the transformation of a patch?
Not very. It's basically a set of rules. So the most interesting cases come in, for example, when you're if you're say merging or commuting two hunk patches to individual line changes to the same file, and then you have to make sure that it's safe to do it and that you have to adjust the offsets appropriately. Similarly, if you're doing that with file renames and so forth, you need to make sure that you change the patches that touch that file. But the code for doing that in itself is probably a few pages. 50, 100 lines, that sort of scale. Thank you.